earthquake swarm right now hitting the San Andreas fault in California, right near.
This is right down the road from me, and God was with us, and no one died, but there's a lot of devastation.
Across the United States, a series of devastating events is unfolding with unsettling intensity. Powerful earthquakes are shaking California along the San Andreas Fault. Violent hailstorms are destroying homes and vehicles within minutes. Massive tornadoes are tearing through entire communities, while dangerous wildfires continue turning the skies orange across multiple states. At the same time, growing instability within technology, energy systems, and daily life is leaving many people with the feeling that something larger is beginning to shift. Individually, each disaster can be explained, but together, they are creating a level of pressure and uncertainty many Americans have never experienced before. Are these simply isolated tragedies happening at the same time? Or signs that the world around us is becoming increasingly unstable? Watch until the end of the video, because what we are about to witness could be ushering in the most turbulent period America has faced before the apocalypse. The disturbances reportedly affected parts of the digital infrastructure modern society now depends on, including large-scale AI data operations. In several regions, monitoring systems recorded brief interruptions in network stability during periods of heightened seismic and geomagnetic activity. For most people, life continued as normal on the surface. But beneath that surface, something unusual was beginning to draw attention from engineers and observers alike. In California, a series of powerful earthquakes once again shook areas connected to the San Andreas Fault. Residents described sudden nighttime tremors that came without warning, enough to wake families from sleep, scatter objects across rooms, and trigger emergency alerts across entire counties. While seismic activity is not uncommon in the region, what concerned some was not a single event but the clustering of multiple disturbances within a short period of time. At the same time, reports began emerging of heightened solar and geomagnetic activity affecting parts of the upper atmosphere. Satellites, communication systems, and certain large-scale digital infrastructures experienced brief but noticeable instability during this window. Engineers emphasize that modern systems are built to handle fluctuations like these. Yet for a brief moment, the smooth invisibility of the digital world, the systems that quietly power communication, finance, and information, felt slightly less certain. In some areas, concerns quickly spread about power, stability, rising energy demand, and the possibility of temporary disruptions affecting daily life. For millions of people already dealing with economic pressure and rising costs, even short interruptions in essential services can feel deeply unsettling. Not because collapse is happening, but because it reveals how dependent daily life has become on systems most people never see. And perhaps that is what feels most unsettling. Humanity has built entire systems around technologies, expanding faster than most people can fully understand. Massive AI data centers now operate continuously across the world, consuming enormous amounts of energy every day, while quietly supporting communication, search systems, financial networks, and digital services that shape modern life in real time. Yet most of these systems remain invisible to the public. They exist in the background, unseen but essential. And when even brief disturbances occur, they expose a reality that is often forgotten. How much of modern civilization now depends on complex, interconnected networks functioning without interruption? Some quietly wondered whether moments like this reveal not only the vulnerability of modern technology, but also how deeply society has become dependent on systems that very few people truly understand, let alone fully control. Before this new technological era accelerated across the world, life moved at a slower pace. Information traveled differently. Systems were simpler. Daily routines were less connected to invisible infrastructures operating behind the scenes. But now, even the smallest disruption can ripple outward in unexpected ways, revealing just how tightly woven modern life has become with technology. And for a brief moment, As parts of these systems experienced instability, it reminded many people of something they rarely stop to consider: how fragile the balance between natural forces and human-built systems might actually be. It raises a deeper question. As humanity places more trust in systems it cannot fully control, are we moving closer to the kind of deception Scripture warned could one day spread across the world? Do you think the deception has already begun? Share your thoughts in the comments below, hit the like button, and share this with others so we can reflect on it together. And while questions about technological stability were quietly spreading across parts of the country, one that did not arrive with sirens or sudden winds, but with heat, smoke, and an expansion across the land itself. Across multiple states in the central region of the country, weather alerts escalated rapidly as rotating storm cells developed into severe tornado-producing systems. What began as unstable atmospheric conditions soon evolved into a widespread pattern of violent storm activity stretching across several regions. In some communities, residents described an unusual stillness before the storms arrived. The sky would darken abruptly, winds would shift direction without warning, and the air itself would feel heavier, almost suspended, just moments before the system became active. Then, without much time to react, tornado sirens began echoing across towns and small cities. Emergency alerts appeared on phones, warning residents to take immediate shelter as radar systems detected rapidly forming rotation patterns descending from storm clouds. In several locations, tornadoes touched down with significant force, cutting across highways, fields, and residential areas. Witnesses described it not as a slow-moving storm, but as a sudden collapse of normal weather behavior, like the atmosphere itself had shifted into something unpredictable. As the tornado systems moved through affected regions, entire neighborhoods were placed under emergency evacuation orders. Power lines failed in some areas, debris filled the air, and visibility dropped to nearly nothing as the storms carved through communities. In one of the affected communities, a resident described coming back after the storm had passed. What she found was not just damage, but near total destruction across entire sections of familiar streets. She said quietly that many houses in her area had been completely destroyed or severely damaged by the storm's force, leaving almost nothing recognizable behind. What once was a close-knit neighborhood now stood as broken structures, collapsed roofs, and empty foundations covered in dust and debris. And yet, amid that devastation, she paused for a moment and spoke with a sense of gratitude that contrasted deeply with everything around her. It's hard to even describe what we've seen. Everything is gone. But by the grace of God, everyone made it out safely. We are still here. And that alone feels like a miracle. Her words carried both relief and sorrow at the same time. Relief that no lives were lost in her immediate circle, but deep emotional pain over the scale of what had been razrushted in such a short time. She described watching neighbors standing in silence, some in tears, looking at what used to be their homes, struggling to process how quickly everything familiar had disappeared. Moments like this often leave behind more than physical destruction. They leave a silence that is difficult to describe, as if an entire sense of normal life has been temporarily erased and replaced with uncertainty. Meteorologists continued to explain the dynamics behind these systems: atmospheric instability, wind shear, and large-scale weather interactions across multiple states. These explanations remain essential for understanding severe weather behavior. Are these simply the random forces of extreme weather? Or is creation itself beginning to groan, warning us of an even greater storm yet to come? And as tornadoes swept across the ground, large hailstones rained down from the sky above. Across several regions, weather alerts began warning of rapidly developing severe thunderstorms capable of producing unusually large hail. What started as scattered storm cells soon intensified into broader systems, stretching across multiple states, bringing sudden and violent changes in weather conditions. In some communities, residents described hearing a distant rumbling sound long before the storms arrived. The sky would darken, temperatures would drop quickly, and then without warning, the first impacts would begin. Then came the hail. At first, it started small ice pellets striking rooftops and windows. But within minutes, the size and intensity increased dramatically in certain areas. Residents described the sound not as rain, but as something closer to continuous impacts hitting every surface at once. Cars, roofs, and streets were suddenly exposed to a force coming directly from above, with very little time to react. Visibility dropped in seconds as sheets of ice fell through already unstable storm systems. People rushed to protect vehicles, seek shelter, and cover windows as the storm intensified overhead. In some places, the accumulation of hail was so rapid that roads became covered in white layers resembling winter conditions, despite the season. One resident described the moment simply, "It sounded like something was breaking the sky open above us." Meteorologists explain that hail forms within powerful thunderstorms when strong updrafts carry water droplets into extremely cold areas of the atmosphere, freezing them before they fall back to the ground. In severe cases, these ice particles cycle multiple times within the storm, growing larger with each pass. These systems are not new to the region. But what drew attention in recent events was not the existence of hailstorms, but their intensity and the speed at which conditions escalated from normal rainfall to damaging ice impacts. For many communities, the aftermath was immediate and visible. Vehicles were damaged, roofs were marked, crops in rural areas were affected, and streets were left covered in layers of ice that melted slowly under changing temperatures. And yet, what remained with many residents was not only the physical damage, but the suddenness of it all. The sense that there was almost no transition between calm and chaos, only a brief silence before the sky changed its behavior entirely. In moments like this, people often try to make sense of what they have experienced. Meteorology provides clear explanations: updraft strength, storm structure, atmospheric instability. These frameworks are essential for understanding how such systems form. But even with those explanations, standing beneath a storm of falling ice creates a different kind of awareness. It reminds people how quickly conditions above them can shift, and how little control exists once those systems fully develop. And as these hail-producing storms continued to move across parts of the country, a broader feeling began to grow, one that was harder to measure scientifically. A feeling that the atmosphere itself was no longer behaving in a predictable rhythm, but instead moving through increasingly unstable phases, one after another, without clear separation between them. The American people have gone through difficult times. They can send their peace and prayers to God around the world to protect us all. And as the storms of hail and wind gradually moved away from some regions, what remained was not silence in the usual sense, but a different kind of tension settling over daily life. The skies began to clear in certain areas, yet for many communities, the sense of disruption did not fully disappear. In the days that followed, reports from different states began to reflect a quieter but more persistent concern. Not about a single disaster, but about the cumulative pressure of recent weeks. People described feeling increasingly exhausted, not only physically from dealing with weather disruptions, but emotionally from the constant cycle of alerts, warnings, and uncertainty. In some households, daily routines became harder to maintain. Sleep patterns were disrupted by repeated emergency notifications. Work schedules were interrupted by weather-related closures. And even in places untouched directly by the storms, there was a shared sense of unease, as if stability itself had become less predictable than before. At the same time, healthcare providers in several regions noted a growing number of people seeking support related to stress, anxiety, and emotional fatigue. While life continued normally on the surface, there was an underlying weight many described but struggled to fully explain. It was not tied to a single event, but to the feeling of prolonged instability across multiple areas of life at once. It feels like we're always waiting for the next warning, even when nothing is happening. And that sense of waiting, of never fully returning to calm, became one of the defining experiences for many during this period. Physically, the strain also began to show in more subtle ways. Fatigue became more common. People reported difficulty focusing, increased tension in daily interactions, and a general sense that the normal rhythm of life had been disrupted even when conditions appeared calm again. It was as if the body and mind were still responding to storms that had already passed. Medical professionals often explain these reactions through stress response mechanisms, the body's natural reaction to prolonged uncertainty and disruption. When people experience repeated periods of heightened alertness, it becomes more difficult for the nervous system to fully return to a state of rest. But beyond the clinical explanations, there is also a human reality that is harder to quantify. It is the experience of living through a period where stability feels conditional and where calm no longer feels permanent. In quieter conversations, some people began to reflect not only on recent events, but on how quickly their sense of normal life could shift. What once felt routine weather forecasts, daily commutes, planning now carried a layer of unpredictability that was difficult to ignore. And perhaps that is where the deeper pressure truly lies. Not only in the events themselves, but in what they do to the human sense of certainty over time. In moments like this, people often begin searching for grounding, something stable enough to hold on to when everything else feels less predictable. For some, that comes through family, community, or reflection. For others, it becomes a quieter, more personal search for meaning in the midst of uncertainty. And as this emotional and physical pressure continues to build across different parts of society, attention begins to shift once again toward the natural world, where another, far more visible transformation is already beginning to take shape. Because after wind and ice comes something entirely different. Across multiple western states, fire conditions began to intensify with terrifying speed as temperatures rose and humidity dropped to suffocating levels. What initially appeared as isolated incidents of smoke and small ignitions quickly expanded into massive, fast-moving wildfire systems, fueled by erratic winds and decades of dry, dying vegetation. In some areas, what started as distant, seemingly harmless smoke on the horizon soon became towering, fully developed fire fronts advancing mercilessly across vast stretches of land. It was as if the earth itself had been turned into a tinderbox, waiting for a single spark. Residents in affected regions described the moment of realization as sudden and deeply unnerving. The sky did not just darken, it shifted into a bruised, apocalyptic orange, while the sun became obscured, hanging in the haze like a dull drop of blood. The heavy, choking smell of smoke would arrive long before the fire itself, carried by shifting winds that seemed to change direction without warning. To many believers watching the heavens turn to ash, the imagery was impossible to separate from ancient prophecies. Revelation 8 speaks of a time when a third of the earth and the trees are burned up, while Joel 2 warns of blood and fire and pillars of smoke before the great and terrible day of the Lord. And then, as the skies darkened, mandatory evacuation orders would follow almost immediately. Entire communities were placed under frantic evacuation as roaring fire lines approached residential areas with a speed that defied logic. Highways became hopelessly congested with vehicles leaving in urgency, while emergency services worked continuously to redirect traffic and protect critical zones. People were forced to leave everything behind with only minutes to spare. For many, the experience was not only about escaping with their lives, but about watching the familiar landscapes of their memories disappear under suffocating layers of smoke and consuming flame. It felt like a chilling, modern-day echo of Christ's warning in Matthew 24, where people are told to flee to the mountains without even turning back to grab their belongings, driven forward by a disaster they cannot outrun. Fire behavior specialists and meteorologists continue to explain these extreme events through known environmental factors: prolonged historic drought conditions, unprecedented heat waves, shifting wind patterns, and critical vegetation dryness. These conditions are well documented within climate and wildfire science, providing a rational framework to explain how quickly fire can spread once ignition begins. But even with those clear scientific explanations, what many residents experienced on the ground felt infinitely larger than statistics, climate charts, or weather forecasts. It felt like witnessing entire landscapes change within hours, as if time itself had accelerated the destruction. It felt like a physical manifestation of a spiritual reckoning. In Scripture, fire is never merely a natural disaster. It is the ultimate symbol of testing, purification, and divine judgment. The Apostle Peter warned that the present heavens and earth are reserved for fire, being kept for the day of judgment. Watching the mountains burn, that ancient warning suddenly felt terrifyingly present. And as the fires continued to ravage affected regions, consuming forests, hillsides, and the fragile edges of human civilization, a broader, more somber reflection began to form among those looking out over the charred remains. Because unlike violent storms that eventually pass, or floodwaters that eventually recede, fire leaves behind something permanent in its absence. It reshapes the land completely. It devours what once was and replaces it with a heavy, blackened wasteland. It leaves behind a silence that feels different from any other kind of devastation. And standing in that ash-covered silence Looking out at a landscape stripped of all life, many people began to realize something difficult to put into words. That after the violent winds have passed and the destructive ice has fallen, and unbearable pressure has built within human lives, fire does not feel like just another storm. It feels like an ending. It feels like a final chapter in a sequential timeline that has been unfolding step by step, precisely as ancient texts warned it would. And the question that remains is not only what has been lost to the flames, but what all of this is pointing toward next. Are these just the natural consequences of a changing world? Or are we watching the Earth being prepared for the final days? In several regions across the United States, observers began reporting a deeply unsettling phenomenon that did not resemble the violent storms, the deafening hail, or the raging tornado systems that had dominated the headlines in the previous weeks. Instead, what people described was something far more difficult to interpret, and in many ways far more terrifying moments where the sky itself appeared to become unnaturally, completely still. It was an oppressive, heavy stillness. Cloud formations in certain areas seemed to hold their shape far longer than expected, frozen in place against the sky, almost as if the very concept of movement had slowed down or paused entirely. Leaves on trees hung motionless, like statues carved from wood. Winds that were strongly forecast to shift and move massive storm systems along their natural path instead appeared strangely inconsistent, weakening and dying out in ways that surprised and confused even seasoned local forecasters. The air felt thick, dense, and physically heavy to breathe, as if the barometric pressure had trapped the entire landscape underneath a massive, invisible glass dome. In some locations, residents reported brief, disorienting instances where the horizon felt strangely distant, as if the depth, perspective, and curvature of the Earth had shifted slightly. Lights from sprawling cities appeared diffused and scattered in unusual, eerie ways through the stagnant haze and unmoving cloud layers, creating visual effects that some described as a painted sky. An uncanny, artificial-looking atmosphere that felt deeply unfamiliar, even though experts insisted it remained within the extreme boundaries of natural explanation. Meteorologists and atmospheric scientists were quick to step in, continuing to emphasize that atmospheric variability is technically normal, especially following large-scale storm systems, massive fire activity, and severe temperature fluctuations. They used terms like atmospheric blocking patterns, stagnant high-pressure domes, and energy redistribution. They explained that when immense amounts of thermal and kinetic energy in the atmosphere redistribute after back-to-back extreme weather events, unusual visual and environmental dead zones can occur temporarily. And yet, for the millions of people who experience this phenomenon firsthand, stepping out onto their porches and looking up at the frozen sky, what stood out was not a single, measurable meteorological metric. It was the overwhelming psychological feeling of the stillness itself. After weeks of relentless tornadoes, shattering hail, and consuming fire, the sudden, absolute absence of motion felt aggressively noticeable. We are a society conditioned to react to alarms, to the roar of the wind, to the breaking of news and the shaking of the earth. But when the earth simply stops moving, it triggers a different, more primal kind of fear. One observer, standing in a neighborhood that had narrowly escaped the previous week's destruction, described the sensation perfectly. It didn't feel like a beautiful, calm day. It didn't feel like relief. It felt like something invisible was happening right in front of us. It felt like the entire world was holding its breath. And perhaps that is exactly what made this specific period so difficult to define and so impossible to ignore. Because when destruction is active and visible, the human mind understands urgency. We know how to run, how to hide, how to rebuild. But when everything becomes absolutely unnaturally quiet after continuous, violent disruption, that silence itself becomes a weapon. It is the agonizing tension of waiting for the other shoe to drop. In that profound, heavy silence, people across the country began reflecting on everything that had unfolded over such a terrifyingly short span of time. The unprecedented earthquakes rumbling beneath the earth, the sudden, inexplicable instability affecting parts of our modern, supposedly infallible technological systems, the violent, record-breaking tornado outbreaks tearing through the heartland, the sudden hailstorms that shattered cities, the apocalyptic fires that reshaped entire landscapes into ash. And now, this strange, suffocating stillness that seemed to settle over the atmosphere, wrapping the Earth in a quiet shroud. Individually, isolated in a vacuum, each of these events has a perfectly rational, scientific explanation. Earthquakes follow the friction of tectonic movement. Storms follow the collision of atmospheric conditions. Fire follows heat, prolonged dryness, and wind. And yet, when viewed together in a rapid, unforgiving sequence, a growing number of people began to feel that something infinitely larger was unfolding. It was not necessarily a single physical cause, but a convergence of multiple, overwhelming pressures collapsing across different systems, both natural and man-made at the exact same time. This is precisely where the interpretation begins to shift from scientific observation to deep spiritual reflection. For some, passages from the Gospel of Matthew and the Book of Revelation began to echo loudly in their memory. Scripture often speaks of the earth experiencing birth pains. Matthew 24-8, a process marked by intense, violent contractions, followed by periods of deceptive, breathless calm before the next, stronger wave hits. Furthermore, Revelation 8-1 describes one of the most chilling moments in apocalyptic prophecy. When he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. In biblical context, this silence is not a sign of peace. It is the terrifying, awestruck pause of all creation before the final, most severe judgments are unleashed. It is the moment the universe holds its breath. These ancient texts are resurfacing in modern minds not as direct, literal explanations of today's weather patterns, but as a symbolic, prophetic language perfectly describing periods when the world feels dangerously unstable and impossible to interpret clearly. It is not just about prediction, it is about perspective. Luke 21 warns of a time when men's hearts will fail them from fear and the expectation of those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. That expectation, that silent, gnawing dread of what is coming next, is exactly what the still sky produced. Because in quiet, suspended moments like this, the question people inevitably return to is not only what just happened, but what it all means when the pieces of the puzzle are placed side by side. And as the sky remained unnaturally still, holding its breath across vast regions of the world, that burning question did not fade away into the quiet. It only grew louder, heavier, and far more present. If the earth is pausing, what exactly is it waiting for? And when all of these events are placed side by side, a larger picture begins to emerge across the United States. The world feels as though it is vibrating at a higher, more dangerous frequency, and humanity is feeling the physical toll of that frequency every single day. Individually, isolated in a vacuum, each of these events can be easily and thoroughly explained through modern science. Tectonic movement and the slow, inevitable friction of continental plates. Atmospheric instability driven by shifting thermal dynamics. Seasonal weather patterns colliding with unusually warm ocean currents. Dry conditions, historic droughts, and shifting erratic wind systems. These scientific explanations are undeniably real, and they matter. We possess the most advanced meteorological satellites, the most sensitive seismographs, and the most sophisticated climate models in human history. We can measure the exact barometric pressure of a collapsing storm system, and we can map the precise epicenter of a subterranean rupture. But when viewed together in a rapid, unforgiving sequence, these isolated data points begin to form a haunting narrative that many people find much harder to dismiss. It is not because the events are identical, a fire is not a flood, and an earthquake is not a tornado. It is because they appear to be unfolding in a way that feels deeply interconnected in both timing and intensity. We are no longer dealing with 100-year disaster per generation. We are watching compounding crises overlap. The fire destroys the forest, the lack of trees causes the catastrophic mudslide when the abnormal storms arrive, and the supply chains break down, leaving communities isolated. It is a cascading failure of the natural world. For an increasing number of people, this convergence of chaos raises a much deeper, more profound reflection that goes far beyond the boundaries of standard meteorology. Could these truly be nothing more than a series of highly unfortunate, unrelated natural disasters coincidentally occurring dangerously close together in time? Or are we witnessing the undeniable birth pangs of a broader, far more terrifying pattern that modern humanity is only just beginning to recognize. Throughout the pages of Scripture, numerous passages speak in vivid, highly symbolic language about times of great global uncertainty periods where the world experiences violent upheaval across nature, society, and human understanding at the exact same time. One of the most often referenced and heavily debated is found in the direct teachings of Christ regarding the signs of the last days. In chapters like Matthew 24 and Luke 21, the texts describe moments when fear, geopolitical confusion, and profound global instability begin to increase simultaneously. The earth is described as groaning, much like a woman in the intense, accelerating pains of labor. The closer the moment comes, the more frequent and severe the contractions become. These ancient warnings were never meant to serve as a precise mathematical timeline. They do not offer dates on a calendar. Rather, they serve as an urgent, timeless warning to remain spiritually awake. And that is exactly where the meaning of everything currently happening begins to shift. Because whether one chooses to interpret these escalating events entirely through the rigid lens of science alone, or through a deeply spiritual, prophetic lens, the ultimate impact on human perception remains the same. The illusion of human supremacy is breaking down. People are beginning to ask hard, uncomfortable questions they did not have to ask a decade ago. Questions about the true nature of stability, about our arrogant belief in control, about the fragile reality of the future. For the last century, humanity has operated under the illusion that technology had conquered nature, that our concrete cities, our early warning radar systems, and our digital grids made us untouchable. But when the earth decides to violently open up, or when the sky decides to unleash its fury, all of our advanced technology is instantly reduced to nothing. We are reminded, violently, that we are merely fragile tenants on a restless, groaning planet. And perhaps the most important question circulating in the minds of millions right now is not whether these specific, localized events perfectly confirm any single, isolated ancient prophecy, but why, in this exact, specific moment in human history, so many vastly different systems, the natural, the environmental, the economic, and the human, seem to be buckling under maximum pressure all at once. Why does it feel like the fabric holding the modern world together is suddenly fraying at every single edge? As the United States, and indeed the entire world, continues to face these relentlessly unfolding disasters, one sobering reality becomes increasingly difficult to ignore, no matter what you believe. When the ground beneath your feet is unstable, when the sky above your head is violent, and when human life itself feels increasingly fragile and unpredictable, people, naturally, instinctively begin to search for something greater than a scientific explanation alone. A Doppler radar image provides data, but it does not provide comfort. A seismograph provides a magnitude number, but it does not provide hope. The human soul demands something more, something truly unshakable, something that stands firm far beyond the reach of the physical chaos. And for many watching the horizon darken, that desperate search for an anchor leads directly back to the exact same haunting question that has echoed through generations during the darkest times of human crisis. Are these simply the random, tragic anomalies of a chaotic, natural world? Or are they the undeniable, flashing signs that the world as we know it is rapidly moving toward a greater, final end that was spoken of long ago? Thank you for watching this video to the end. If this story made you think, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to stay with us for the next revelations.